the agenda, the urgent moral obligation we hold to protect the basic human rights of the LGBTQI communities at home and around the world. I want to thank my House colleagues, Representative Robert Garcia and Representative Sarah Jacobs, who are here with us today, as well as the advocacy organizations who have led the charge in promoting these values and demanding dignity for all people, regardless of where they live in the world. Specifically, I would like to thank Baron Roos Snyder, Senior Policy Fellow at the Council for Global Equality, and David Stacy, Government Affairs Director at the Human Rights Campaign. In the past week alone, anti-LGBTQI paragons continue their procession of prejudice. In Uganda, lawmakers passed a bill to harshly penalize members of the LGBTQI community. In Kenya, the LGBTQI people are being targeted and victimized for attempting to protect their own rights. And even in our own country, just this week, states across the country are pushing to expand anti-LGBTQI rules in schools and beyond. Throughout the world, governments are using surveillance technology to track and target LGBTQI people. It happens everywhere. It's clear LGBTQI people are in peril as a result of this persecution. This is undemocratic, unconscionable, and unacceptable. The bottom line here is that no one in any country should be penalized for who they are or who they love. Gay people, lesbians, bisexuals, non-binary people, transgender people, and all LGBTQI people across the globe must be protected. It is our moral responsibility. Tomorrow, representatives from more than 100 nations are gathering for this year's Summit for Democracy, where they will convene around universal democratic values for the planet. And there is no democratic value more universal than the notion that human rights belong to everyone. As a co-host for the summit, the United States has an imperative to meet this moral moment by calling out human rights abuses around the world and reaffirming our commitment to safeguarding the fundamental rights of the LGBTQI communities where they live. That includes right here in the United States. I first introduced the International Human Rights Defense Act during the National Pride Month in 2014 to showcase the importance of appointing an LGBTQI special envoy. I thank and applaud the Biden administration for heeding my call and appointing special envoy Jessica Stern, who will undoubtedly lead the United States to energetically prioritize the need to protect LGBTQI rights as fundamental human rights around the world. But that is just a start. As attacks on LGBTQI ramp up, so must our efforts to combat hate and solidify fundamental rights for all people. We are here today to say that the United States must commit to putting LGBTQI rights at the top of the agenda in diplomacy with global leaders, and they can start by demonstrating that commitment by making this administration position permanent. It should not vary from administration to administration. It has to be permanent. Our legislation will do just that. It will also mandate the implementation of a strategy to prevent ruthless discrimination against LGBTQI people so that we can stem the suffering and instead celebrate and uplift the LGBTQI communities. Whether here or abroad, we can no longer stand by. The time to act is now. That is why we are here. We want to ensure that we keep this as a front burner issue. So now I'd like to pass this along to my friend and colleague from the House of Representatives, Representative Robert Garcia.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today, but especially to the Senator. We know that the Senator has been a champion on LGBTQ plus rights globally and here at home. And we're very grateful to the continued work in the Senate and, of course, to our co-lead in the House and my good friend from California, Sarah Jacobs. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be the lead sponsor of this legislation in the House, and I especially want to thank our former champion, Congressman Alan Lowenthal, for his work and also getting this bill to where it is today. We're also proud today to be backed by over 60 members of the House and our colleagues who have already and are serving as co-original sponsors of the bill we have in front of us today. Could not be prouder to stand here today to support and introduce the International Human Rights Defense Act. This is actually my first bill that's being introduced as a member of Congress. And for me, it's also very personal. As the first LGBTQ plus immigrant in the U.S. House, it's incredibly important that the global rights and human rights of all people are respected around the world. So many LGBTQ plus immigrants, like myself, are grateful to be able to live in this country openly and freely, able to marry, able to have families, free of persecution and discrimination. But we know that that work is so much more important right now at this moment, not just here, but globally across the world. While we're seeing attacks here locally by some on trans people, on parenting, in our schools, we're also seeing that happening across the world. Currently in 67 countries, there are national laws to criminalize same-sex relationships. In 11 countries, you can be executed just for being physically intimate with your partner. We know that LGBTQ plus people all across the world can also and are murdered for just who they love. In other countries, you can be thrown in prison just for sharing LGBTQ plus stories or what they call propaganda. We as a country cannot be silent, and we know that love is not a crime. It's important for us to promote love, support, and acceptance across the world. In the U.S., we're so proud to have immigrants across our country supported by states and by this Congress, particularly recently. We've stood up for democracy here at home and continue to do so as attacks constantly happen, but that same power and support should happen across the world and globally. The International Human Rights Defense Act meets the challenges, and it ensures a global LGBTQ plus strategy across the world. We know not only does it actually make permanent the special envoy position at the State Department, which is critical, but also encourages the U.S. government to continue to move equality forward by annual reports, strengthening the State Department's commitments to global rights, and making sure that Congress has an avenue to work with the White House and the State Department on such an important issue. I again want to thank the Senator for his incredible leadership on this and for his support. And with that, I'd like to introduce our friend from California and our lead co-sponsor in the House, Sarah Jacobs.
Well, thank you, Robert. You are such an amazing addition to this Congress, and I'm so excited that you're here. And thank you, Senator Markey, for being such a champion on this issue. I'm proud to join you both in introducing the International Human Rights Defense Act. Especially when it comes to human rights, America's words and actions matter, and they have ripple effects all over the world. America is at our strongest when we lead with our values and are able to convene coalitions around them. But when our allies and adversaries see that state legislators here in the United States have already introduced 430 anti-LGBTQ plus bills just this year, that also makes an impact. It sends a signal that America won't stand up for human rights at home, so how will they stand up for them abroad? And this isn't limited to state legislatures. Congressional Republicans have introduced a new transgender military ban and demonized trans kids playing sports. Last week, House Republicans passed a bill that would force the outing of LGBTQ plus kids to their parents. LGBTQ plus kids hear and internalize all this hatred and discrimination. and it impacts their mental health. This discrimination isn't stopping at our borders. Last week, the Ugandan parliament passed one of, if not the most anti-LGBTQ+ bills in the world. In a country where same-sex relationships were already illegal, it goes further by punishing some crimes with the death penalty and imposing up to 20 years in prison for people identifying as LGBTQ+. When I worked at the State Department, I saw firsthand how successful American diplomacy could be at addressing, minimizing, and resolving these issues. And that's why the International Human Rights Defense Act is so necessary, important, and timely. As the sister of a trans brother and a gender nonconforming sibling, I know that our bill meets this moment. Our legislation codifies the State Department's Special Envoy for the Rights of LGBTQI+ people and establishes that supporting the rights of LGBTQI+ people around the world is U.S. policy. It requires developing a strategy to address discrimination and violence against the LGBTQ+ community and reporting LGBTQ+ human rights abuses in the State Department's annual country reports. So we know where countries are meeting these standards and where they're falling short. If we want to restore America's credibility and reputation as human rights defenders on the world stage, then we must protect LGBTQ+ communities. We must defend the right to love and exist freely, and we must lead by example and live our values. Thank you so much. I'll now turn it over to Bjorn Roos Snyder at the Council for Global Equality.
Thank you all. My name is Bjorn Roos Snyder. I'm the Senior Policy Fellow for the Council for Global Equality, the coalition of 35 organizations working towards LGBTQI+ inclusion in U.S. foreign policy. I want to extend the coalition's thanks to Senator Markey, Representative Garcia, and Representative Jacobs for their leadership in introducing the International Human Rights Defense Act today. As we stand in this second week of the Second Summit for Democracy, there's no more important time to align our foreign policy with the summit's theme that democracy delivers and make democracy really deliver for LGBTQI+ people. Here in the US and around the world, LGBTQI+ rights are a canary in the coal mine, and we need all the possible tools to support those canaries and also to make the mine safe. Last week, Uganda took a huge step backward for human rights by passing a violently anti-LGBTQI+ bill that takes their current criminalization further to criminalize association, information, housing, HIV service provision, and other basic rights of all people. The community call to action from our civil society colleagues in Uganda states clearly that they condemn the bill in no certain terms and in its entirety as a hate bill. Quote, "We call on everyone to walk the talk of Ubuntu, democracy, human rights, constitutionalism, and equality for every Ugandan." While there's nothing stopping the U.S. from action for Uganda and other countries today, the International Human Rights Defense Act is a timely and important chance to strengthen the policy and tools of the State Department. We welcome its introduction as another step towards inclusion for LGBTQI+ people and communities globally. It's now my opportunity to introduce David Stacey, the Government Affairs Director at the Human Rights Campaign.
Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm David Stacey, Government Affairs Director at the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ+ civil rights organization. I want to start out by obviously where everyone else started, which is thanking the sponsors, especially Senator Markey, who was a champion on these issues when it was hard. And not that it's easy now, but he did it when it wasn't popular, but it was the right thing to do. And he's been working on these issues for a very long time, and we appreciate his leadership. And of course, we have two newish members of the House, Congressman Garcia and Congressman Jacobs, who are a new generation of champions and who have already stepped up and been leaders, and they're gonna be huge stars as we go forward and leading on these issues. So appreciate them as well. And I also want to take this opportunity to recognize Congressman Lowenthal for his leadership on this bill for many years, and he really brought this forward, and really appreciate all the work he did on it as well. Bern mentioned it, but we have more than 450 anti-LGBTQ bills at the state level. We have not seen this sort of unprecedented anti-LGBTQ attacks ever in the history of this country. More of those bills have passed than we've ever seen before, and these are really extreme and horrible bills. And so, the United States does not have a clean record here either, but we have people around the world who need the United States to be a champion, and we have an administration that has a very different view than some of these state legislatures do, and we have a Congress that I think also has a very different view for the most part. As we take a look at the challenges coming ahead of us, we know that we're not done dealing with these challenges domestically or internationally, but the International Human Rights Defense Act is an opportunity to strengthen the U.S.'s commitment to these issues and to working to combat violence and extremism against LGBTQI people around the world. Bern mentioned the Uganda anti-homosexuality bill. We saw a similar version of this bill a few years ago that ultimately did not become law, and we hope that President Museveni prevents this bill from becoming law. It would be a huge setback to global rights for LGBTQI people. It is by far the most extreme bill, and it would be impossible to be an LGBTQ person in Uganda. You would not be able to live anywhere, associate with anyone. It's truly extreme. The other thing this bill does, which is really, really important, is to codify the special envoy at the State Department. Having somebody who wakes up every day at the State Department focused on these issues and how the U.S. government is leveraging its resources is critically, critically important. And we've seen that just around Uganda in recent days, where we saw the UN ambassador speaking out. We saw the Karine Jean-Pierre speaking out from the White House podium. The Secretary of State spoke out. Across the administration, we've seen a whole of government response to the crisis in Uganda, and we need to have this position enshrined in statute so that we know that there's somebody every day focused on these issues. With that, I think we'll take questions, and I'm happy to turn it back to Senator Markey.
Yeah, questions. Beautiful, good, great job. Questions from anyone? Great. Thank you all so much. Thanks for being here.